within certain communities and contexts and certain societies within Bangladesh, not so much in others, but Bangladesh, I think most of us know, have also been tied up in different kinds of political power games for the last 40-odd years. And so it was only in the last elections that this became a very important demand by civil society organizations and also a promise made by the ruling party today, which is the Awami League, with regard to the establishment of the International Criminal Tribunal. So the International Criminal Tribunal is interesting because it's a locally led initiative. It is the prosecution, the mechanisms, the laws are all supposed to be based out of local domestic laws, influenced, of course, by the Geneva Conventions. And these laws were actually created, of course, the law was created in 1973. So there is, of course, there's certain concerns with regard to laws that were committed at that, crimes that were committed and defined by the law at that time, and of course trying it 4 decades later. There have actually been certain amendments made to that law, and I don't know how much there has been media coverage with regard to that, based on criticisms that were offered by, for example, U.S. Ambassador at Large, Stephen Rapp, or the United Nations, or the International Center for Transitional Justice, because transitional justice is such an industry right now in the world of post-conflict reconstruction, and also by other civil society actors and lawyers inside of Bangladesh. So certain measures have been taken, for example, changing the system from having military judges to civilian judges, or with regard to certain issues of bail, or the right for the defense to cross-examine, etc. But there are certain challenges the court faces, and I would argue that it's beleaguered by. First is, of course, the lack of expertise in prosecuting crimes of this particular magnitude. This has never been tried and tested before, so this is a very new field for the Bangladesh judicial system to try and grapple with, just as it would be with regard to the Guatemalan case. There are questions with regard to the independence of the court and the proceedings, and I think there has been a lot of debate and discussion with regard to how much is the court independent or politicized by the ruling party. There's criticism with regard to those who have been chosen, so-called, or selected for the prosecution, and they of course come from the Jamaat-e-Islami party, and a couple of them also come from the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, so obviously those members of those parties are highly critical of the court. There's a whole dimension with regard to the international support in questions of legitimacy. I'll get to it later, and with regard to the international support for the defense proceedings. And finally, of course, the court has not taken into consideration the kinds of pearls of wisdom, if you would call it, from the International Criminal Court. I mean, they have a document called Elements of Crime that is out based on the kind of jurisprudence that they have dealt with regard to difficult cases. And one of the suggestions made was perhaps the ICT can actually work with some of those lessons learned. And the criticism has been that it hasn't been able to do that very well. Now, I talked about the international political dynamics, and before that I just want to answer a question that Humayun has posed before me, which is the International Criminal Tribunal of Bangladesh transitional justice? Right? For those of you who are not perhaps familiar with the term transitional justice is a term that was sort of developed in about 2000, in the last 10, 12, 13, 15 years. It has become an extremely popular sort of framework to talk about questions of war crimes and how to respond to them. It comprises of different kinds of mechanisms. Trials are definitely one of them. Some of you may be familiar with this whole notion of truth and or reconciliation commissions, lustration or vetting processes, reparations, etc. And I have 2 minutes left. But I think that to the extent that Bangladesh is trying to deal with this question of accountability for war crimes, it is certainly a response to this larger moral, legal imperative to deal with questions of justice. But of course, by the nature of the judicial process, it is also bound and complicated by its limitations. And there are many. Outside of the ones that I have mentioned, you also have to think about issues with regard to the fact that ICT has also become perhaps marginalized or perhaps not taken quite as seriously by the regional powers, and that is very important to think about. In terms of international support, the defense has actually reached out to the international community of lawyers and has been able to put together a really strong defense team. For example, one of the defense advisors has been part of the legal defense advisory team of Slobodan Milosevic of ICTY in Serbia. So when you talk about, expertise, and you talk about, the ability to actually maneuver these kinds of legal arguments in court, obviously the defense is in a much stronger position. With regard, there have been, I don't know how many of you, there have been some WikiLeaks information with regard to Pakistan not being actually happy with this trial proceedings and has approached the United Nations to not take on such a strong position with regard to the trial, and France has actually supported Pakistan's position. So again, the trial proceedings in and of itself, while absolutely problematic with regard to certain rules of procedure and certain mechanisms of justice it is trying to work with of course complications and trying to work in a very, very complicated and highly politicized environment, is also beleaguered by the fact that it does not have any kind of proceedings. We also have to see what has been the role of the international community, and some of it has been extremely problematic, that is for sure. But the ones that we know most about, the ones that garners the most amount of financial support and questions of legitimacy, such as, for example, the Cambodia trial, or, for example, the special courts of Sierra Leone, these are the ones that have had some kind of robust intervention, whether military or in terms of being able to capture individuals or stigmatize, develop sort of a narrative of stigmatization, not criminalization, that's a very different issue, but stigmatization and isolating these individuals in a way so that you can actually talk about this question of prosecution. These are the problems that the ICT actually faces. So I will end my point here because I think I'm well over 2 minutes, but I'm reminded of something that Hannah Arendt said many years ago, but I think that is really relevant, and if I can just find it in my notes because I keep forgetting the exact quote, which is, if you hang with me for 1 second, maybe I won't be able to find it, but it was very important. I will find it. Yes, I have found it. We are unable to forgive what we cannot punish, and are unable to punish what has turned out to be unforgivable. I think a lot of you might have questions with regard to a lot of things I talked about, so I'm happy to try and discuss some of them towards the end.